chilling sound rings out across the world in all its dimensions. The sky darkens. Soon the great nether trade comes to an end. The Wither, created from the depths of the nether, using the raging souls trapped inside of soul sand and the lost skulls of wither skeletons, is a ferocious monster which seeks to destroy every living creature in sight and destroy as many blocks as possible. The Wither takes the great nether trade and its inhabitants by surprise. The world was largely at peace. Players submitted to piglin rule over the nether and continuously traded gold with them in order to be able to explore the nether more deeply and understand this new dimension they have found, as they also improve upon themselves in the overworld. The Ender and their Endermen stay to the side in the forgotten biomes of the nether and in the dark places of the overworld. Yet still, the Wither takes this entire peaceful world by surprise, turning the interconnectedness of piglins and players against itself, being able to ravage countless portals, structures, and living creatures, their families, in the depths and heat of the nether. As countless piglins and players, hoglins and enders died, they needed to recuperate. They could not take this death and be the war pigs they claimed themselves to be. The piglins needed to distance themselves and create large, strong bastions in order to consolidate all of their treasures, their food supplies, and their living quarters. Soon, it would be time for the offense. Piglins had to begin to fight back. Donning their shiniest gold armor and golden swords, they had no choice. They did not and could not hesitate to fight the Wither, nor its originating wither skeletons. They took them on as soon as one came into sight and in range. Of course, there are still many great mysteries about this great tragedy. It is rumored that players may have even assisted piglins in fighting. Of course, it was their society that was under attack as well. Rumors and scholars state that perhaps players once inhabited the wither skeletons in other fortresses, as we can see traces of the remains of materials and weapons and armor that they may have used in order to prepare to fight. Yet, however, perhaps the wither skeletons, the Wither, even in an alliance with the Blazes, soon drove players out as well. In further retaliation, the Wither, or as many theories suggest, Withers, started appearing in the overworld as well, in order to get back at the players for their continued transgressions against the wither skeletons and the Wither. They needed to take the fight to them. Skeletons traveled to the overworld and built withers there as well, ravaging the many villages and structures they've had and built up in peace. The players took a heavy blow being attacked in both dimensions. They needed to retreat. Taking hold with them both villagers and Ender, they retreated underground to create a bastion of their own. They created large, hollowed-out strongholds in order to begin to help keep their society together, filling it with many libraries, jail cells for the incompatible, and one of their most hopeful discoveries and creations, using some of the blocks that the Enders have taken with them, perhaps a portal and a way out. Our scholars and rumors do not tell how long both players and piglins had stayed in hiding from the Wither. It just may have been quite a long time, as the Wither's power allowed for the undead to roam the overworld without fear of the sun. Without that, these monsters could continue ravaging the many villages and structures that inhabited the land, infecting everyone in their path and spreading the disease very wide. No matter how long it took, though, eventually the fight had to go on. Of course, the specifics are unclear, but we suspect that the full force of netherite armor and tools, enchantments, and magic was used by both piglins and players in order to combat the great oppression by the Wither that tore down their society. They needed to do everything in their power to make sure every single one of them was eliminated. They needed to push back the ability of the Wither skeletons to continue to attack their land. They needed to some rumors still go around stating whether or not the overworld's original ghasts were part of the Wither's army, for it seemed it was the one living creature the Wither chose not to attack. And perhaps that the ghasts either followed the Wither and their skeletons in the Nether, or they were told and forced to go there as a result of their alliance. Yet the aftermath of the Wither's destruction remains. Many of the overworld villages could not be returned to, as the undead had took it all upon themselves to take them over entirely. Many of the undead have retreated to the dark places as the burning sun returned, waiting for the nighttime to restrike against the players and villagers. Some wonder if the Wither's effects could affect their lives in different ways. As it is seen, it seems as if many of the life forms in the Nether have stagnated. There are large wastelands in the Nether where no life grows. Baby piglins don't grow up. It seems that the forest may not grow as efficiently as they once did. But perhaps we will never truly know just how powerful the Wither was. And hopefully, we never have to find out. But eventually, through all of the destruction, through all of the death, through all of the fear, through all of the retreat, through all that was lost, eventually, in both the Nether and the Overworld, as far as we know, the Withers and their skeletons were defeated. The Withers were seen no more, and the skeletons retreated to their fortresses, ready to take on anyone who steps into their domain. The Great Nether Trade was over. The piglins could not take the fact that the players had essentially abandoned them to fight the Wither on their own, when they obviously did not have access to the same resources as the players did in the overworld. That would have greatly assisted the fight and may have ended it even earlier. It is rumored that many of the players perhaps even retreated. Perhaps the portal was successful and they decided to try and create new lives on a new horizon. And who knows what has happened to them. So Minecrafters, building upon the last episode, it's an obvious game mechanic. Piglins do fight the Wither, right? We do understand that at some point in the game, the Withers were created, and Wither skeletons were present as well, and Piglins understood that they were a threat to their authority, to their society, and had no choice but to fight these powerful creatures. I find it so inspiring that piglins just don't with just gold armor or gold tools, some gold swords and some crossbows, just don't hesitate to get up into the Wither's face and take it down as on sight. And it takes us players, so long to build up the courage to fight that, and we feel as though we might need to have some complicated mechanics. We all need potions and enchanted armor, and piglins just just go at it. I find that super inspiring. But regardless, the idea that the Wither is a part of the piglins' history is really no mystery. Kind of just going through each of the portions of the story and theory. I think it's possible that piglins built bastions as a way to, defend themselves against the Wither. I mean, the definition of a bastion is, a well-fortified position, something that is upheld or defended, as against something that's threatening. So I think it's very likely that the bastions were used in order as a fortification to protect themselves and to prepare against fighting against the Wither. And I think that's supported by the fact that there are plenty of piglins that don't live inside the bastions. It seems that beforehand they would have been comfortable kind of just roaming the land, potentially different buildings, maybe smaller certain things, we don't know, but there's no traces of that. But maybe they were just comfortable walking around the Nether as we see them now, and then many of them needed to get together in order to have these bastions, in order to put together all of their resources before a big fight. And I think that makes sense. The players inhabiting Nether fortresses, I think, makes sense because looking at the loot of Nether fortresses has really seems like it'd be player related things. We have saddles, horse armor, some weapons and armor, obsidian and flint and steel, I guess, for overworld and nether travel, diamonds, which is overworld, and then between gold, nether wart, and iron, these would just be the resources that these players would have been storing away in order to create their tools and armor in order to go back out and fight. And so after the battle, or I guess even after they've been kicked out, a lot of their resources would have been used for armor. So that, you just have those extra diamonds and ingots left, that extra armor that didn't have a horse assigned to it as they were fighting in the Nether, left behind as they needed to evacuate. Some of it was just left behind, and I think that makes sense. And I think it's reasonable that blazes may have entered the fortresses at this point, given that blazes don't fight piglins, which is something I've just never really gotten over. It really seems like that blazes were pretty much made to target players at this point because they're defending these fortresses, but they don't fight against a natural enemy of the other creature that lives in the fortress, the Wither Skull, because it doesn't really directly assist them in fighting the piglins. And if the piglins had their bastions and we're fighting from there, we're focusing more on the Wither and the Wither Skeletons at the time. If the Wither Skeletons just needed extra assistance fighting the players that were there, the blazes would have been there. Looking into the next part, the idea of the Wither being in the overworld is, I think, very likely. I don't say we have any very definitive proof of such, but I think there's a lot of little details that really pull it together. I think for one, I don't like this in particular, but I believe chiseled red sandstone, if I'm not mistaken, has the Wither carved into it. I'm gonna try to look it up right now. And boom. If my computer, chiseled red sandstone has the Wither carved into it, which is very interesting. Similar to regular chiseled sandstone that has a creeper face and some text under it, which would hint towards the idea of seeing the Wither for someone in the overworld that could carve it into the block. But this was a fan-made this was like a community suggestion, if you will. So it's not like it was particularly intended to be a thing. So like that is probably like the strongest proof there is, but also it's pretty much not. It wasn't necessarily intended because it was a fan suggestion. And if I can, yeah, I believe on the page relating to sand and sandstone, I believe that's yes. See, someone suggested the wither be on there, so yes. But outside of that, we have things. Of course, the strongholds being an underground kind of bunker that's very large. Is something that is meant to avoid something on the surface, and the wither probably doesn't really show the type of behavior to really follow something. If they did see a line of creatures, players, villagers going underground, there's plenty of animals and other things running away that it would have been more inclined to attack. Just based on the in-game behavior, it doesn't seem like it has the tendency to really go follow something and really follow them underground. And of course, if it's in a different place, then you also have time to do that as well, so that these creatures can go underground and protect themselves and prepare to fight back. I think, in the Bedrock Edition, strongholds tend to generate under villages, or there's a good number of them that generate under villages, which is rather interesting. Like, why is it that that would be the case if villagers weren't a part of this safety mechanic? And I think it's, it would make sense if players and villagers already had a good relationship. Then if players were the ones part of building these strongholds and going underground to protect themselves, it would make sense that the villagers would be taken care of as well. And so building it right under a village, I think, would be efficient for some parts of the overworld. And then the ideas that the undead, I think, is given at this point when the wither's in the overworld, mobs no longer burn in sunlight. So this would have allowed the undead to be pretty much at its peak in power, being able to roam the overworld at all times. And if it's the case that the wither's reign in the overworld was a very long time, I think that assists the idea that many villages would be able to be abandoned at this point. As we have our abandoned villages filled with zombie villagers, it makes sense that that would happen if mobs, or if like the zombies would not burn in daylight for days and days upon end, and the wither would be the perfect catalyst for that to happen. It would seem, of course, possible as we can see in gameplay, but unlikely, I guess, in a more realistic situation, if we're kind of imagining a society as a living, breathing thing rather than kind of like their in-game mechanics. It would be less reasonable to think that something like that can happen overnight, because as we can see, like, it's very kind of one-sided. It's, every house in the village is webbed up, every villager is zombified, and the Iron Golem is dead, and all of that. So it's like, as far as we can tell, if it happened, over a long period of time, I think the Wither's presence in the overworld really supports that idea. And then the idea that, when it comes to the end portal itself, not necessarily directly to the Wither, but I also believe that, as we've mentioned in previous episodes, whoever the Ender are were also a part of this escapade, because they're the only people that could potentially even have access to Endstone in order to build the end portal. Because it's obvious, the end portal is built partially of Endstone, like Endstone and something else, which we don't know right now. But there's no way for Endstone to be obtained besides from creatures that would have traveled from the End to the overworld. And I still think that the Ender are a creature that exists kind of separately to Endermen, and we'll be able to dive a bit deeper into that idea in the coming episodes. But I think, the very fact that these creatures do exist, and we're a part of this in order to assist in building the portal, is very relevant. Ghasts is a very interesting thing. We talked about before, I think in the very first or second episode, that ghasts were likely originally inhabitants of the overworld, but as we can see now, they all exist in the Nether. And it's very interesting that the ghasts, one of the biomes that the ghasts do enjoy, or I guess not enjoy, but spawn in, is the Soul Sand Valley for one, as well as the basalt deltas. But given that the ghasts aren't attacked by withers, they live in the Soul Sand Valley, and they seem like it seems as if they might have been originally overworld creatures. Kind of ties together to me. I mean, why is it that this might have happened if the ghast didn't happen to have an alliance with the wither somehow? I'm not really sure how that would have played out, how that could have been established, but given that the wither doesn't seem sensible, but somehow, some way, perhaps ghasts were in tune with the wither somehow, and either they followed the wither to the Nether, although I think there are some ruined portals that are big enough, or that appear big enough, that they could have teleported ghasts, or perhaps they could have been forced out of the overworld. And I think that is probably more likely, because I think that would give them a reason to dislike players, given that they would have been, beginning to be exterminated as they were siding with the wither, and then forced into imprisonment inside of the Nether, as our achievement would suggest that they are, if you can rescue them from there and bring them home to the overworld. And so I think that's kind of how that might have played out, and kind of an explanation for the ghast's origin story or something. And I think it's interesting, the idea that the wither may have more powerful effects. And of course, it seems like many theories might suggest that it's something else, but we don't have any in-game evidence to support kind of like some sort of a disease or anything like that. But I mean, the wither's presence, I mean, given the concept of something withering away, I think it's very likely that kind of in a real world version of Minecraft, if there is this giant magical creature that seeks to kind of wither away the life force of everything, I don't think it's absurd to think that this could also happen to kind of like non-mobs, like the plants and I guess like the fungi, and the mobs in a different way other than just having the wither effect applied to them, because the life in the Nether does seem rather stagnated. The fungi, like the warped fungi and the crimson fungi, don't grow unless bone mealed. Like they can't grow on their own. Baby piglins don't grow up, and there's a large amount of Nether wastes, like a wasteland in a large part of the Nether, and the large presence of zombified piglins, and I find it strange. I think all of these things could be related. It could just be a simple game mechanic that they didn't want the Nether trees to grow, and of course the waste biome is just the classic Nether biome and whatever. But I mean, baby piglins not growing up seems strange, and I think it's reasonable to theorize that the wither could have also caused a sense of stagnation in all of these living things, and perhaps could have caused the large amount of presence of the undead creatures if their life force was being degenerated somehow as side effects of the wither effect over a long period of time. Like, of course, these were survivors of the original battle, but there was always side effects of these things. I mean, it's not like we really have a way to compare what these magical potion effects like the wither and poisoning and all these things can have on living creatures after a long period of time. So I think it's reasonable to suggest that perhaps these things originated with the wither's presence, or maybe something upgraded the Wither. Maybe the Wither was stronger somehow. Perhaps we can't make the Wither the same way. I don't know. And the Wither had greater abilities at that point in time to make things undead. We don't know. But that's kind of an addition to that. I think that's something to think about when it comes to the stagnation and decay of the Nether itself. And I think I have gone over my concept of 4 piglins. If this kind of thing was present, and it affects piglins in a unique way, if they are some kind of half-breed creature, of creatures between dimensions, and perhaps even creatures between living and undead. Piglins are probably going to have a very unique experience in the world of Minecraft that we really can't compare to many other things if they are the blend between an undead and a living creature, being the overworld pigmen and whatever else occurred in the Nether. But of course, although that's a little difficult to prove, but I think the evidence is there to suggest that piglins are not, I suppose, like an original creature. But I think that's pretty much everything for this theory. I definitely took a while because I wanted to make sure that I could cover a lot of the details as well as be specific, be specific on some things and make sure I could be open-ended on the things that matter, because I think there is a lot of unknown about at this point in time, because when it comes to destructions like this, these things are usually harder to keep track of. When there's just a sudden massacre of a large amount of people and people have to retreat from places of residence to protect themselves, and they're focused on warfare rather than, their everyday lives, a lot of things are going to be lost. And I think a lot of historical records were probably lost of this period in time. And I think this was probably the point in time where a lot of Minecraft's magical technology was probably lost. I'll probably explain some of that a little bit more, but there's a lot of things in Minecraft that we as players can't do. Like, we can't craft tridents or saddles. There are certain enchantments we can't make. I think it shows that there's a lot of things that have been lost over time. And I think the Wither's presence in 2 dimensions out of 3 would probably be a great catalyst for the loss of a lot of historical records and historical practices for their magic and their technology. But I think that's pretty much everything for this video. Let me know what you think about the theories and their explanations in the comments. And remember, don't be a Fortnite fool, Hytzel hypocrite, or Roblox reject. Always be an amazing Minecraft master. Stay blocky.